Oh, hey, friend. Podfading was not in my bingo card for my podcast journey in 2024, but guess what? It ended up happening, and here we are, a month after I was supposed to release the season finale, and it ended up being the season finale that you're getting. So, if you're new here, hi, I'm Xavier. I'm the founder of the podcast space. I work with business owners who podcast, who use and leverage the podcast as the most powerful tool in their business and in their marketing. And so, one of the things that I do with my consulting and coaching is actually to look at what is bringing overwhelm to your processes to avoid burnout. And ironically, I found myself there. So in this podcast episode, we're going to delve into exactly what's happened. I'm going to give you the tea, and I'm going to talk about some processes that you can implement as well, because I'm back for obvious reasons, right? Like I'm back because I found my groove, I found my joy, and I'm changing up a few processes. So I want to talk about what you can do if you're in this situation, and dropping a little bit of a tease into what season 3 will look like. So without further ado, let's get into the season finale of season 2 of the podcast space. Let's go. All right, so even though I am laughing, I spent the best part of the past 20 minutes trying to set up this space, this new space that I'm in. And if you are new here, you may not know that I moved from Dallas to Bentonville in Arkansas. And one of the big things that happened was I was so proactive. I pre-recorded season 2, and I just told myself, I was like, girl, you got this. You have 10 episodes pre-recorded. By the time we get to Bentonville, you'll have at least 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Like, I give myself a month to create this season finale episode where I would wrap up the year, where I would talk about the things that happened and, like what this episode season looked like, because it was the first season that I did before the podcast was episodic. And so I had such high hopes for this. As it was all happening, I was having all the awareness of what was going on, yet I was just so crushed by the emotional weight, really, of the move. And even though we were ready to go, like the house was unpacked within like a week and a half, I was just so, I would say probably a mix of analysis paralysis and just perfectionism. And the reason was that because the space where I'm in right now, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you may notice that the space is not incredibly well lit, because that's one of the reasons that this space is very hard to light up. And so it has 70% less light than my office in Dallas. And so I really struggled with, how do I light this up? I just didn't have the energy to troubleshoot it. And even though I have amazing friends who are so talented, it still felt so hard. And a couple of things happen when you're a business owner, right? So you're focused on, the profitability of your business, the leads, setting up processes. And in that process of moving as well, I announced that the podcast space was going to shift. And so shifting from the perspective of outward facing, a lot of people thought that I only served podcasters, when in reality, I've been serving agencies, podcasters who are, the indie, yes, but business owners as well, right? So I communicate mostly for the business owner and people who are leveraging the show as a tool for their business. And this podcast is part of that communication. And so in that process of moving and trying to figure out how do I go through the list of all these strategic things that need to happen. So website revamp, and then creating sales page, landing pages for all of these different categories, I was just so exhausted. That added up to my severe burnout that I've been feeling for the whole year. And it's one of those things that you don't see coming. You're just going, right? I am a servant leader, so I'm constantly serving my audience. And I started really depleting myself. And so I got sick. The exhaustion took over me. And so a lot of what the strategic actions that I do advise for clients ended up not being, I didn't have the energy to implement them, right? And so we start finding excuses. Okay, next week is going to happen. Next week is going to happen. And that's how it creeps in. And so what is really interesting as well is that I couldn't even just sit down and record an audio ad that would be like, hey, this is happening. The season finale will come later in January. Like I didn't even have the energy for that. And so in a time where you're a business owner, but also you're trying to figure out how is it that in this shift that I'm serving three different types of audiences, how is it that I'm going to go through the communication, the email sequences, the website updating. And so all of these things do take mental bandwidth. And something that is really interesting that I don't think necessarily that I went through, but I'm admitting that as an expert, I messed up, right? And I didn't do air quotes like the right way. In a time when we are living life many times through the lens of the internet, right? Like it's not realistic. And so people choose to highlight their wins and hide their fails or the things that didn't work out so well. And it's not that it happened to me. I wasn't like, oh, I'm a failure because I fell into the trap of podfading. What actually happened is that I did not have the energy because I was like, okay, if I'm doing this right, I'm in quotes, like trying to make it like perfect. I need to have the light set up and I'm gonna this angle is not gonna look right. And it just all of these things that really don't matter. I could have recorded an audio only podcast, yet I was here paralyzed by the decision. So this is actually version 2 because last night I wanted to record a dry run just to get my thoughts and flow. And actually, by doing that, I felt so excited. I was like, you know what? I want to get this down. I want to do this. And by the time that I got up this morning and started recording it, I was like, okay, let's go. And one of the things that actually happened this week that got me to go over the hump was the fact that so many of you, and when I'm saying so many of you, I mean, I'm not talking about hundreds, right? Like I'm talking about a lot of people within the space of 7 days message me to say, hey, Anna, I just listened to this episode. I am so excited to implement the things you talked about. Oh, hey, I really appreciated the last episode, the one that is talking about how you can turn once in a lifetime opportunities into everyday opportunities. And so all of these things, including someone reaching out and telling me that an article that I wrote 3 years ago, and I'm not gonna reveal too much because there's something coming up about that, but that itself, just these little things, these nuggets of stuff, peers messaging me and saying, hey, I'm really looking forward to you releasing a new episode. And all of these things got me into, yes, let's do this. And so it's been quite a journey, right? And so I'm excited to tell you that the new season 3 of the podcast space is going to arrive at the end of January. And so I'm going to have a few guests, which I kind of shied away from at the end of the year because it's just capacity, right? But I'm excited to invite experts that talk about things that are related to the things that you as a podcaster need to know. Talking about websites and how you need to position your website, and then also branding and creator best practices and sponsorships. I have a lot of really exciting interviews coming up. You can still count on me to do the solo episodes, and it's going to be so cool. And I want to kind of not wrap up the season before talking about a few things that happened in the year. So I want this to be a season finale, but also the podcast space finale. And I'm going to right now look at my phone because I created a post and I saw this on Instagram. And one of the things that I did do was continue to show up on Instagram and talk about, and again, on these episodes, I always tell you, hey, connect to me on Instagram so you stay updated, because for things like this, right? You didn't have to wonder I wonder if she just disappeared off the face of the earth. I scaled back, but I continue sharing a lot of podcast advice in there. And so there was this trend on Instagram. There was sharing, it was on a multi-page post, and it said, I didn't think I achieved enough this year, but then I realized, it was I'm paraphrasing here, but it was so interesting because I thought, let's just go down memory lane, because I talked about the things that I good stuff, but then what happened at the back of that? And it's so tied to what happened with the burnout. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you have a notepad, whatever you call it. I call it the notebook of achievements. So this is a notebook that I carry with me or that I have in my office. And so whenever something good happens, I will take notes of that, because at the end of the year, you will forget. And, that's something that I always tell the clients, right? The clients that I work with, the podcasters that are trying to make an impact in the world. And so we're so focused on the big ambitious goals that we have that we sometimes forget the little itty bitty steps and how we're truly making change in people's lives. And let me tell you something. We think that it takes so much to change someone's life when in reality, it takes so little. And the bar to change our listeners' lives and to inspire them is actually lower than you think. It's really low. And we think that we need to do all of these things and we need to be super, super accomplished and have all of these achievements, when in reality, the day-to-day, the little things actually help move our listeners forward. And so let's talk about the things that actually happened in 2024. So I talked about in this post how I attended 5 in-person conferences across the country and abroad. I met hundreds of podcasters, inspirational leaders, and expanded my network of fantastic peers. If you don't know, on Fridays, I host a podcast mastermind with podcast peers. It's a small one. We don't necessarily like bring people on, because the more people you bring, the harder it is to build community for people to feel comfortable talking about the struggles that they're having, the success and all that. And so I had such an amazing year. I mean, I traveled back to London where I used to live. I went to so many different states in the US, California, North Carolina, here in Arkansas where I moved. It's just like a lot of really cool things happened. I think this was the year that I spoke the most at podcast conferences. I hit so many exciting things, milestones of meeting peers that I've been looking forward to meeting and like telling them how much I appreciate them. But that brought another side. And while I did feel incredibly inspired and excited, I felt last year the most, I would say, imposter syndrome I ever had in my life. And when you're serving people and you're becoming more and more visible, you start questioning yourself, do I know this thing? Like, is this right? Or you look around and you see people, again, succeeding, and you don't hear them always talk about the struggles, right? And so, or how much money they're making. I know I'm doing a lot of impact, but trust me, my bank account is not as full as other folks that are more invisible and are doing the work, right? So their priorities are on other things. And so I really felt incredibly frustrated. And again, it ended up the year with me having analysis paralysis and not publishing the season finale. And then being an online entrepreneur, it's hard, right? And you may see me as a content creator. I run a business. And so it's hard to connect to entrepreneurs in the offline world who don't run a digital business. And I've tried. I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years now, and it's always kind of like it's not connected. But again, it's you know that saying that like you have to make friends as an adult in a different way than you did when you were younger, right? And it feels like it's harder to make friends. And so it's just, you have to be more diligent about it. So I really doubled down on like all the collaborations, and I reached out to so many people, and so many awesome things are prepared for 2025 because of all of those that, again, took a lot of energy, but exciting things are happening. So I got it also last year to celebrate in person with some clients that I met online, right? Like they work with me, they work in different parts of the country. We got to meet offline, some of them in conferences. That's one of the things that if you follow me on Instagram, I will give you so much FOMO for not attending conferences that you will get. You will book your first ticket. And so I was so excited. I landed 2 clients at the very end of the year. And so I think for me, one of the big struggles and one of the reasons that I really postponed the podcast season finale was that I was just in a rut. In terms of client conversions, last year was one of the hardest. I had a few clients return, which was so exciting. And again, returning customers means that people are excited to work with you again, which is fabulous. But I realized that I'm not doing great at selling my products and services, and not only doing that in the active selling, but also in the passive selling. And that contributed to a lot of burnout. So I want to make sure that moving forward in 2025, I'm working less, doing less of the busy work and more strategic things. I'm going to continue to educate, but really focusing on crafting the strategy that is going to be selling for me while I'm, doing life. And so another success was that I sent over 60 newsletters last year alone, and not, of course, talking about the email sequences that I have. And then I released 38 podcast episodes, and really cool. 2.3 thousand unique listeners listened to the podcast last year, and 24,000 unique visitors were at thepodcastspace.com, which, by the way, you should visit. It has so many resources. They're super useful. And then I did spend 2/3 of the year struggling to come up with the next phase of the business. I really did. And it's not just like, what's the next phase of the business? It's just like, okay, one, this is not working, right? I need to pivot. But I was like, but what am I pivoting into? And the irony that it was during one of my husband and I traveled to Bentonville to scout out the place and figure out if we wanted to move here. And it was doing the drive that I realized like, oh, this is the vision. This is what I actually need to be doing next. And so it can be exhausting mentally when you're like, okay, I'm working, but like, I don't know what I'm working for, right? Like, I know that this does not bring me joy. I'm struggling to convert clients. And again, if you don't sell, of course, you're not going to convert. But just really thinking about this. And then my husband and I did over 30 projects in the house. And that was the biggest blow for me. I love interior design. If you've been here long enough, you saw my office. It looked so fun, so cool. And this space is rented, so it's not as fun. And so I felt like emotionally, it was just oh my gosh, like we literally spent 3 months doing a renovation, doing over 30 projects in the house and the garden and all. But then we had to leave the house. And it was just so taxing. I was just like mourning, I had this really cool office and now I have this other thing that I don't have energy to set up, but I also don't know what to do because it's just, I guess I was just sad. So anyway, starting fresh in a new state, not having your friends nearby, still having a network. I love my podcast experts, but it is definitely something that is taxing. And then last year, I became a sponsor of the podcast show in London. And even though I was like, let me just tell you, like as a sponsor, it was under $1,000. I wanted to test what would work, like how would that impact my marketing. And it got some traffic to my website, which was cool. But again, because I was like I think it was like $600 that I invested, and I have my logo in the banner outside the podcast show in London. I was like, okay, let's see if, this brings some interesting connections. And kind of didn't, it's doing these things is really hard to track, but it was something that I tried new, and that was so exciting and fun. And then I spoke at Podcast Movement in the beginning of the year. It was so awesome. It was a goal that I had since the beginning of the company. So since 2020, I've been wanting to speak at Podcast Movement. I spoke about how to generate listener engagement on social media through human behavior and analytics. It was one of those so fun. Like, I had people reach out then at different conferences and like, oh my God, Anna, I went to see your talk. It was so cool. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so nice. So that was very cool. I also applied for well over 10 awards and didn't get any. So I applied for awards for entrepreneurship, podcasting, marketing, and didn't get any. So, just staying real here. I also got last year to judge at the International Women's Podcast Awards, which was so fun. And again, I am a multilingual, so I got to hear podcasts in Portuguese and Spanish, and then in languages that I don't even understand. We were given a transcript, so it was really, really fun to do that. And then I actually, in the beginning of the year, co-organized a podcasters meetup in Portugal, where I'm originally from. And I had to co-organize it with possibly the best two folks ever. And so we did it. It was actually, we think it was the first podcasters meetup in Portugal. So in Porto for sure, it was really cool. And so that was so neat. And I really got to create a lot of foundational work for what's coming in 2025. So that was insane. It was awesome. And so I think that reframing your year comes through, constantly trying to do big effort and small efforts. You can take actions that are based on, what it will yield. So it will yield results immediately, medium term, long term. And also those are things that are like micro progress and then macro. So small steps and then big steps. And I think a lot of times we focus too much on doing the things the long term. I certainly did. And so I struggled to see the immediate results. And it was really interesting that as a podcast host, in terms of growth, I've become so confident talking now, even though sometimes I mess up. But again, I speak too fast and my brain is like, whoa, like slow down, girl. But I would have never become as confident as I am today in front of the camera if it wasn't for my podcast. And so I think, as I'm looking through my notes right now to wrap up the episode, I want to bring you some things to consider. And that is, try to create anchor points that remind you that no, you're not failing. And that, yes, sometimes you will do. And it's not gonna yield right away. And everything will come at some place. Or sometimes things will happen in a way that you didn't expect or not in the percentage you were expecting. And so just knowing, like, keep it in the big picture. But be diligent and strategic about the things that you need to do in order to stay profitable, in order to stay happy. And so something that I noticed was that I was not allocating enough time to do things that bring me joy. I was doing a lot of strategic things, honestly. Some of them, it's fine, I'm doing them, but they were not lighting me up. And I think that when you lose the spark is when it's problematic. And so realizing that, okay, like this is not bringing me joy, whatever it was, I was not promoting the podcast in the best way. So a lot of what I'm doing for 2025 is reassessing, what am I doing? What do I need to delegate? What do I need to hire for? And so what do I need to allocate time and batch? So basically sit down and focusing on other elements of SEO, or I am tweaking titles that are not like performing as great as I could, or allocating time for learning how to streamline using new tools, right? And so as you are looking into what you want to do in 2025, really is key to remove what isn't bringing you joy, that also isn't giving you results, right? And this is the mistake we end up doing, is like we do and don't take time to assess. And so finding yourself an accountability buddy or a coach, this is where I'm like, hello, me, I do that. And so from finding sponsorships to like landing your dream guests, to networking with decision makers, to getting opportunities to speak at conferences, all of these things can be done in a gazillion different ways, but the way that is going to be best for your personality, for the stage you're in life, but then also is assessing what needs to happen now, is not just looking at the processes, but also strategically in your communication. Just because, just like the seasons, you need to do things in a different way. You need to look at content creation, your processes, your standard processes, the same. And so I want to invite you to really think about, as we start the year, into what is actually converting into the goals you want and what is busy work. I also want to remind you that you can visit thepodcastspace.com for any resources I have created. I think by now we're very close to 100 articles, and then of course almost 100 episodes as well. So you have the search bar, you just tippity tap on there, you look for what you need, and if you don't find it, you can always book a discovery call with me, because that's what those are for. And so I want you to succeed in 2025, remove all the expectations, just like I'm doing right now. I'm like, I messed up. I am owning my boo-boo and telling you that, like, in the season finale of the podcast space, I'm taking a couple of weeks off, and then I'm coming back on the last week of January with season 3 of the podcast. So excited. And so I want to remind you that so much can happen, but you don't need to chase all the ideas, but you need to be strategic about what you want to do. And so as always, I invite you to book a discovery call if you're looking to get coaching, to get consulting that is going to get you to the next level of your podcast, because nobody wants overwhelm. Nobody wants podfading. No. Thank you very much. Not in 2025. We're being mindful and strategic. So you can go to thepodcastspace.com/grow, and you can learn about the different ways that you can work with me as well at the podcast space. And as always, I invite you to create imperfect content that moves you forward. I'll see you in the next episode.